Hello everyone and welcome to another live session here at the DIF, where we today are going to talk a little bit about metrics and why they matter in a circular economy. During the past couple of years, circular economy has gained traction and a lot of companies are seeing benefits in it, maybe because it allows them to capture additional value from products and materials, but also to mitigate risks in terms of price volatility and in terms of material supply. But measuring a circularity of a product and service can be a challenge due to so many activities, projects, and actions that could be called circular. Unfortunately, no single framework has been yet accepted, and this lack of framework makes it very difficult for us to compare results between companies, cities, and countries. And today I have a guest who believes that metrics do matter a lot to advance the circular economy. And this is Marc de Wit, the Director of Strategic Alliances at Circular Economy. So thank you for joining us, Marc. And I will just in a minute go into a discussion with Marc about these metrics and why they matter. But before, I would like to talk to you guys that are joining in live to post your insights. You have thoughts, maybe you have questions about metrics and why they matter. So please send them through so we can ask Marc these questions. And Marc, I would like to jump right in the discussion with you. And the first question that I would like to ask you is, why exactly do these metrics matter?
Right. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on DIF. So I think why metrics matter is really, first and foremost, because it provides us a common language. If we start to think about metrics, we need to have a discussion on what to include in a metric, what not to include. And kind of in that process, we're crafting our language. We're crafting a common language, and we need to make very clear choices. What I think in that sense is that a metric goes beyond purely what we want to measure. It's really kind of crafting and discussing with each other what we really mean and where we want to focus on. And I think in that perspective, it's good to also see where we stand now. And I think because we're not starting at zero, in the last decade or so, where we've seen huge buildup and traction of the concept of a circular economy, which is now embedded both in nation-state policies, in business strategies, etc. And we've seen many initiatives to start measure really on all those levels. From a city level, a product level, even a material level. But I think it's safe to say that we are dealing with an emerging topic that is still in its infancy, because although we've seen many initiatives, we didn't really see consolidation yet. And I don't think that has been a problem, because really the focus was on really anchoring the concept of circular economy and really getting that mindset right. But now that we have arrived at that point and that we are seeing a huge traction, I think the point in time is now to start looking more in consolidating and really see how we need to make those choices. And really, as an example, I like, we're here in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and we have a government that has quite some ambition on the topic. So we, as a country, want to be fully circular by 2050. But then immediately the question arises, what does that even mean? Does that mean that everything that we use in the country of the Netherlands is designed in a circular way? Does it mean everything that is produced here and that is being exported across the globe is produced in a circular fashion? Does that mean that we want to be self-reliant within the confines of our country? Probably not, a small country that we are. So I admire, and I think it's great that there are more and more vision statements, ambition statements by nation states, by businesses. But really then also the question is, well, how do we start measuring that and really keeping that on track, making that also comparable, make sure that we have uniform ways of looking at those targets, on measuring progress, in dissecting that. So I think really we come at a point in time where that's absolutely needed. And then maybe to just kind of start the discussion and pave also the way for any questions or discussion we could have on the topic, I think there is, in measurement frameworks in general, we of course have huge experience. For example, on measuring greenhouse gases, we have the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. We have a lot of experience with crafting kind of globally consolidated frameworks. And I think when it comes to circular economy, there are two very important things to differentiate between. And one is what you could call as end state metrics. So the circular economy is, in my view, a means to an end. And the end goal is that we, for example, want to adhere to the Paris Agreement. So we want to keep the globe on a 1.5 degree pathway, and therefore we need to emit less CO2. That's really a desire, whether we call it circular economy or not, that's a desire as mankind that we have, which I think is very nicely summarized, for example, by Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics, where she calls that kind of the safe operating space. So on the one hand, that's preventing global overshoot, and the other hand, it's kind of lifting the prosperity, making it more equitable, etc. And I think those are end state metrics that are not necessarily specifically need to be measured by circular economy, but things we want to do regardless, and things we have huge traction on already with, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals and with the Paris Agreement. Then looking more specifically in the topic of circular economy, I think it's very important to consolidate the frameworks in two ways. I think there are common denominators in how we think about circular economy that are true regardless whether we look at a city, at a nation state, at a private business, potentially at an NGO, at a product, at a material. There are common denominators that we need to fix in such a consolidated overview. And then we also need to have that branch out to very specific elements. So if you measure the circularity of a city, for sure that will be different than measuring that of a material like copper. And I think we need to do all of that. And to also get the discussion going, I want to point to one particular example, which is something that we at Circular Economy launched this year, at the beginning of this year, which we called the Circularity Gap Report, which was basically an X-ray of our global economy and looking at, well, how circular is our global economy? And what we looked in there is at 4 key dynamics that, in our view, summarize a circular economy. And one was that we want to limit the extraction of new resources from the crust of the earth. So limit oil drilling, natural gas, the extraction of ores. Another thing that we wanted to do is minimize really and stop wasting. So minimize the loss of materials once they're used. And the way to do those two things is to use better what we already have. So refurbish an MRI scanner that we have, refit a building that we live in rather than demolish it and build it new. And another thing is cycle more and cycle better. And I think that should really be the discussion and really start in consolidating these frameworks and thinking, well, what is the core dynamics that we want to capture in the specific remnant of a city, a product, a corporate, and then start looking at, well, how can we really start measuring those? And really coming back to the Circularity Gap Report, what we concluded in there is that our global economy currently is only 9% circular, hence more than 90% linear, leaving a huge circularity gap. And that's really what we did there on the global level. But I think it's time now to start consolidating that on all levels. And that's really what I also would like to to end with and start the discussion with, is really that we invite all people to get in contact with us and to join forces to really make that happen and see how we can align the process, how we can tap into the vast experience that is out there, and really make that happen. So maybe that's kind of a starting overview, and maybe it's good to engage with the audience at this point, Ladar.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that rundown on why metrics matter. And indeed, we have some questions about what you're talking about. And specifically, one of them is about this 9% circular world that you have touched upon on the Circularity Gap Report.
Right.
And so what would you see are maybe the challenges with having circular metrics in a world that is inherently non-circular? Do you see some challenge with that?
Yeah, great question. Well, I see a couple. One is the question would be, can we live in a 100% circular world, or is that limited in whatever way? Should we aspire for it to be 100% circular in the way we defined it? And I think that will be hard and also not necessary, at least in the short term. Another clear challenge to how we approached it. So we made it ourselves very easy by looking at the globe, because hardly anything goes in and out, other than a satellite and a meteorite. But other than that, it's a closed system. So that's the easiest. Once you go to a nation state, for example, with imports, with export, it becomes more difficult to measure. And one particular thing that we didn't include in that metric, coming to 9%, is what I would consider to be the core of the circular economy, which is about how do we keep things in our economic system for as long as possible on the highest possible quality. What we looked is really what moves out in terms of waste and what cycles back, which is a very rudimentary way of defining circularity, and actually doesn't do right to the core principle of what a circular economy entails. Nevertheless, I think it captures kind of the four dynamics I spoke about in the best possible way. If you are able to bump up the 9%, then you're for sure on the right track. And there is a lot of dynamics under the hood that you need to understand better, and wherefore you need to develop more metrics, I think, to get a better handle and to get also goals set for those particular dynamics.
So what would your opinion be then on the mix of qualitative and quantitative metrics here? For we can measure what we can improve, we say, and companies pretty much want a mix of these two. How do you see that developing in the upcoming years as well? Is there a balance, or do you think one of these two sides of the spectrum will gain a little bit more traction than the other?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of qualitative measures, I think also if you look at, for example, how many companies now work with their ESG, environmental, social, governmental scorecards, those are hugely qualitative. And I think they've done great work in really lifting the bar and making sure that we have kind of the bottom in place. At the same time, it is difficult to use those kind of qualitative measures to really go into goal setting and to measure progress at the extent to which I think it is needed. So I think what we need to put more emphasis on is also consolidating the quantitative measures. But for sure, qualitative is always kind of a good first step, is always important to put these numbers into context. So it for sure needs to be a mix of both, but I think we're stronger at this point in the qualitative measures than the quantitative one. So I think that's really where the development should happen, and hence also the consolidation.
And we can see a number of stakeholders and interested parties being in these questions, and there's governments, there are businesses, there are customers that really want to know what's happening with the circular economy and particular aspirations from different stakeholders. So what are the key data points you think where we could roll up our sleeves and start working with this? Where do we exactly start?
Well, I think one interesting starting point, and that's also what we applied in the Circularity Gap Report, is that if you start to look at current statistics, whether it's in your own business, whether it's in your region, in your city, in your nation state, and we're tracking a lot of statistics. If you start looking at those statistics that are already there with a new lens, with a circular lens to it, you can come and recombining those statistics in new ways. We can come to very new insight based on statistics we already have. So I think that for sure should be the starting point, because as we know, it is very difficult to adapt and change the ways to which we get our statistics. So if we start now, we only have valuable insights kind of a couple years down the road at best. So I think starting from what we have now, but approaching that with a new lens to it, I think for sure should be the starting point, and recombining that in new ways. The other thing is really to work and see what we need to fix now. And I think, for example, ISO, so the global organization working on this, I know are looking at this. I think also the World Resource Institute, for example, who played an instrumental role in the greenhouse gas protocol, etc. They're all looking into this. They have the experience in developing these approaches. So start looking with a fresh eye on current statistics and paving the way to gathering new data that inform us even better in how to keep track.
And I think that's a perfect end to the discussion. If we focus on what we can improve now, we can also measure it, of course. And you just mentioned some of the ways we can do this. But for everyone out there that is joining live and has been listening to this discussion, you can still engage with it even after the video is uploaded. So please head back if you have any questions or you have any suggestions on where to start, how we do things, and how we should improve in the upcoming years. And if you're interested more in the Circularity Gap Report that Marc has told us about, it will be posted in the comment box on the thinkdiff.co session page. So please head there as well to get some more insights on this matter. And we thank you once more, Marc, for joining us in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And for everyone out there, head to thinkdiff.co to explore a little bit more about what we have prepared for you today. And just a little notice to everyone out there, it's Startup Day tomorrow. So prepare yourself for a day full of startups that are changing the way we look at business and paving the way for circular economy. Thank you to all, and see you soon again.